Welcome to the first new Zan Talks in way too long. Free cookie to anyone who can name what game the new Zan Talks title card is based on. I actually do have some giveaway stuff. Maybe I could, I don't know. Someone leave a comment. Anyway, first and foremost, I'm no expert on this stuff. I don't have any kind of background in game design or anything like that. I just play a lot of games, and I work at a retro game store. So take anything I say with a grain of salt. This is all just my opinion and general thoughts on the subject. Okay, intro aside, let's get to the topic at hand, which for today is video game genres. The point of this video is to examine how we classify games and what some of those classifications really mean. The first video, this one, is going to be very broad, and this is mostly to lay the foundation for more specific topics I want to tackle down the road. I know I'm not going to single-handedly change the entire video game market and how we talk about games, but there are a few specific titles and a few overly broad genres that I would like to try and narrow down. So what really is genre? Well, by dictionary terms, genre is a category of artistic composition, as in music or literature, characterized by similarities in form, style, or subject matter. For video games, I might add something like the mechanics by which you interact with or experience the subject matter. I feel this is an important distinction between how we categorize video games versus other forms of media. Take, for example, some of the most common genres we see in books and movies. Romance, action, drama, horror, comedy. Without going into any more detail than that, you know more or less what kind of experience to expect from those genres when it comes to film. But what about games? Let's take a moment to talk about comedy. Again, you hear comedy and you know more or less what kind of things you can expect from the story. A gag here or there, even more serious things have a lighthearted air to them that gets broken up by some humor. But what about the gameplay? The way you experience each moment in the game is very different between, say, Psychonauts and something like Portal. Both have different types of humor to them, but both are designed to be humorous. But from a gameplay perspective, you would describe Psychonauts probably along the lines of platformer or collectathon, whereas Portal you would probably call a puzzle game. Standard genre definitions just don't work as well for games. Even horror, probably our closest and most easily relatable genre, has its quirks. You have things like survival horror, where it's very much about resource management. These games usually take a heavy lean on conventions of the action genre in their final act, but generally you go around and you're trying to gather what resources you need to survive. And then you have puzzle horror, where it's less about finding a way to overcome the horror via strength with things like guns, and it's more about hiding, finding a key or a code, and solving, well, puzzles. And then you have what I lovingly call YouTube horror. You probably know the games, the stuff like Five Nights at Freddy's, the smaller indie titles full of jump scares that, for most, are more fun to watch other people play than they are to play yourself. And don't get me wrong, I actually love these kinds of games. The ones that become successful usually do so for a reason, be it an interesting new approach to gameplay or deep hidden lore that make people have to go over things with a fine-tooth comb. But still, it's not the same as a horror movie. There's more to it than the horror experience. To put it simply, games are a more interactive media. Since there's a difference in how you experience the setting with each and every game, we need genres that are more involved than just story structure. But even knowing that, some of the ways we classify our genres seem almost silly. We have an entire genre based about a camera angle and one mechanic of gameplay. I am of course talking about the first-person shooter, a genre that is completely defined around being in a first-person perspective and shooting people. And when you hear about those words, what do you usually think about? Halo, Call of Duty, Battlefield, maybe Borderlands? What about Portal? It meets the requirements we set forth. It's a game where you shoot and you do so from the first person, but we don't really think of it as a first-person shooter generally, do we? Even Borderlands, I know more people who think of the game as an RPG first and a shooter second. If I wanted to play a game that was like Borderlands, I probably wouldn't think to reach for Halo first, but maybe something more along the lines of an Elder Scrolls game. There's a difference in game feel. In Halo, the satisfaction comes from the kill. For story, it's killing all those aliens, preventing you from getting to the next bit of story. Or for multiplayer, it's from getting the highest KD ratio and winning against other human players. In Borderlands, there is a similar story satisfaction, but more than that, the main rush comes from leveling up, from getting cool new skills, cool new loot, and maybe taking down one of those really hard endgame raid bosses. And of course, for Portal, it's that aha moment when you figure out a puzzle you were stuck on. And of course, the hilarious dialogue.
Well done. Here come the test results. You are a horrible person. That's what it says. A horrible person. We weren't even testing for that.
Some of the categories we use, like first-person shooter, are just way too broad. Action games, adventure games, and RPGs are a few of the names we give to a very wide variety of games. And often we give these games a multitude of broad categorizations on top of each other to help narrow them into whatever specific feeling they give. But then once in a while, we have a stroke of genius. Some games have such a specific feel and become so iconic that they create a new genre all their own that others try to emulate. This is where we get things like roguelike and Metroidvania as genres. And I feel these are some of the best categorizations we have right now. When someone talks about a Metroidvania game, you know exactly what kind of game you'll be getting yourself into. You can expect it to be this side-scrolling, exploration-based game, with probably some light platforming, generally some really cool, often huge bosses, and as you go, you'll find different weapons or powers that help you to unveil more of the map, opening up more and more of the world as you go. Some have RPG elements, some have rogue elements, some are shooting focused, some melee focused, and yet they still all have the same game feel through the way you explore and experience the world. If you have that feeling like you want to play a Metroidvania, you know exactly what you want to play. And I think blank-like is something we should use more. We already compare games to each other all the time, so why not take the most iconic of certain types of games and name genres after them? Obviously, this is harder in some areas than others, and a lot of times, some of the more broad categorizations just work best, but I think it's something for us all to think about moving forward. So, from there, how do we move forward? Where do I go from here? Well, that's the thing, I'm not entirely sure yet. I have certain topics I already want to tackle based on this subject matter, but what comes first and what I end up actually having much to say on is still up in the air. I feel that the way a game's story and mechanics make us feel through the experience should be our primary way of classifying our games, and ideally I plan to tackle some of the more broad subjects, or some of the more obtuse game series, and try to pinpoint exactly what makes those games tick. We'll see where I go, and maybe through these videos I might be able to change your mind and how you look at and think of some games. Heck, maybe while putting some thought into this subject, I'll manage to change my own mind of how I look at some of my favorite games. Only way to move is forward, and who knows what the future may hold. Till then, let me know what you think so far. How do you feel about video game genres? Are they too broad, too narrow? They're fine and I'm putting too much thought into this? How well do you think this episode went? First time I've put a bunch of time into recording, editing, and written out a script, so how did it go? Are you interested in more of my thoughts on this subject, or should I quit before I inevitably incur the wrath of rabid fans? Let me know either here or in the comments, on the Facebook page, or even on Twitter. That's a thing the channel has now. All things associated with the channel will be linked in the description below. Hope you have a wonderful day. This is Zanshlou, signing off.